Okay, so let's do the math and see what we come up with. So again, this is very similar to what we would do in a big factory. It's just that we'd have a lot more, in a big factory, you'd have a lot more processes and a lot more complexity. But the basic method is very similar. So we have, in this case, we have one process, so mask assembly, we might call it. And we've defined previously how many minutes per day we have, right? 420, and the efficiency factor. And then the times that we took from Victoria's video. So we just watched it and recorded the times. And then we're adding, when we add the efficiency factor, that kind of adds additional time that we're allowing in our design. So 9.25 was the raw time, but we're allowing 11.56 minutes for labor, and for say machine work content time, 4.05, but we're allowing 5.06 minutes. And so now that we have the work content times we're going to use, we can do some calculations. So to build 100-day, follow with me this logic. If we have 100 per day, remember a day is 420 minutes long, that we want to build, then that means that if we divide the 420 minutes by the 100, that we have to complete one mask every 4.2 minutes. So that at the end of the day, we've done 100, right? So it's really simple logic. So that 4.2 minutes is kind of the pace that we need to set, or we call it the tack time, the rhythm or the beat of this line. It needs to flow at that rate so that at the end of the day, we have the number of units that we want and need. So it's 4.2 minutes is that pace. Now, if that's the pace we want to achieve, and we know how long it takes to do the work, we can very easily calculate how many people we need to achieve that, and how many machines, sewing machines in this case, we need to achieve that. So the 4.2 we divide into the time, so 11.56 divided by the 4.2 gives us almost 3 people, so 2.8 people. We'll round up to 3 people. So that's the number of human beings we need. And the number of machines, we're going to use that 5.06 minutes and divide it by the 4.2, and that gives us 1.2 sewing machines. So clearly we need 2, right? So 3 people and we need 2 sewing machines. With the 200 per day, it's basically double, right? We just doubled. We're using the same input data, so it's basically double. So instead of 3 people, we'll need 6 people, and instead of 2 machines, we're going to need 3 machines. Well, look at that. Because of the difference in capacity of 1.2, so we had a 0.8 that we didn't really need. When we get to 200, we find that we don't actually need to double the number of machines. We just need 3 sewing machines. So we're going to use this data then to go to the next step in our line design process. That tells us what our goal is. 3 people, if we're focusing on the 100 people, the 100 masks line, 3 people and 2 machines. And let's see where this takes us.
So with that, now we know that we need, let's stick with the 100 idea, right? Now we know that we need 2 machines, 3 people. So that means that not everybody has a sewing machine, right? And normally what we do is the number of people, we round it up, and that's the number of workstations, physical locations where people do work. So what we're about to design and show you is a line where 3 people work side by side, respecting social distancing rules, side by side, building one single mask sequentially. I do 1/3 of the work, I give it to you, you do 1/3 of the work, give it to the next person, 1/3 of the work, and into the bag. And as Richard said, benefits. First, the volume. You're going to hit higher volumes, which is good. Right now, we want to get as many masks done as possible. And also, and probably most importantly, the fact that you have 3 pairs of eyes on the same mask, the quality is going to be much higher. You can almost guarantee that every mask going into the bag is going to be a much better mask. So we're going to divide the work, that entire list that we got from Victoria, we're going to divide it into 3 approximately equal increments. That's our goal, and to have it as even as possible. Yeah? Now, there is a good chance that we won't be able to divide it exactly into 3/3. So there will be a little bit of give and take, right? So this will not be perfect. It will be very good, but not perfect, and you will perfect it as you bring the cell live and you practice it. Yeah, there will be a need to rebalance the work, and by rebalancing, we mean moving a little bit of work one way or another. So give yourself a little time, and we're going to give you also a couple of recommendations to minimize that imbalance so you can get those 100 at the end of the day.
Okay, and of course your volunteers are going to get better at building these masks the more practice they have. And so they're going to get faster, in other words. So if they come in the door as completely inexperienced, the first maybe couple hours are going to be a little shakier, and then their skill level is going to go up. And so you may find that there's some adjustments that are going to be needed as people get better and better and come up with ideas for how to improve it, maybe making some changes. So those are all things that are really good and expected, and you should expect that to happen. Okay, so here's our list of steps, of work steps. And these times were taken directly from Victoria's video. So these are the steps to build a particular style of face mask. And I've colorized the different stations. So the first group through row 10 would be the first station. So the first person would be doing those steps. And you can see M and L stands for machine and labor, that first station needs a sewing machine. So a sewing machine would be available at station 1. Then the blue tasks are doing some preparation and pinning work, which is somewhat time consuming. So a sewing machine is not needed for that station. That would be the job for person number 2. And then person number 3 basically is completing the sewing, and a sewing machine would be needed there as well. So that's it. Now, again, these times are Victoria working, and you may find that your people are working at slightly different speeds, especially if they're not experienced. So we'll talk about how we deal with that in just a minute. So this would be the volume of 100. Let's take a look at the volume of 200 now.
Yeah, what you're going to notice on this one is that we have more workstations, right? You're going to see that the top layer there colored in gray, those are the tasks for the first person. Then in pink is the second station. And then notice all the way at the bottom, all those yellows, that is the final stitching, right? The final sewing. And what we're saying there, notice all the way to the right, we are calling those parallel, because once you start stitching, you don't want to stop at the second corner and pass it to another person. In that case, you want to finish all the stitching. But if you do all the stitching, right, then you're going to go over the pace. You're going to slow down the line. So there what we do is we split into two parallel workstations rather than 2 sequential workstations. Instead of dividing the work into two people keep exactly the same amount of work. So we go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 2 4s. That makes sense? So that's what is happening here. So let's have a look at that arrangement graphically, see what it looks like.
Okay, so this is what we might end up with in these 2 scenarios, 100 per day and 200 per day. It's very simple. Now, social distancing, if 6 feet is the goal, then you'd have to have that distance between those stations. I guess you'd just throw it, right? Or have a little way of getting it to the next station. But in a non-coronavirus world, we would try to put these stations close enough together so you could just hand it off to the next person. It could even be one long table that the three people are working at, and you just slide it down to the next person. That would be better than having to separate people with 6 feet
9
between
feet
stations.
across.
Yeah.
But actually, 6 feet is not that long between two people. So it would be perfectly reasonable to put a mask on the table and just slide it to the next person. So even with one of those graspers that folks had to use to pick up stuff from the floor, that's probably another way of moving the product.
Yep. And you can see here at the end what Gerard described. So we have the station 5A and 5B. So we have 6 stations in total, but the last 2 are doing the same work. They're just doing it in parallel. They're doing exactly the same steps. We just have 2 of them to accommodate the fact that there's more work, there's more time required at those stations that we don't want to stop and then hand off to someone else. So that's what you see there. But that shouldn't be a problem. It's not a difficulty with managing the flow because it's at the end, right? It just goes to the end, and then the masks are done. Now,
if you're working at station 4 and station 5A is busy, you give the mask to station 5B. That's all there is to it. Or you put a pile in the middle, and they consume as they can.
Sure. Now, a little comment in looking at this. Could you have 2 100 per day stations and get the same number of units you'd get from the 200? Yes, obviously, yes, right? And in fact, that's kind of how we might suggest you approach this, because there's some advantages to having a simpler line or a simpler cell and just increasing the volume you might need just by having more of them. It's going to be more difficult to manage this 200 per day design, where you have 6 people that are all connected in a row, rather than having one that just has 3 people.
And also the second design, the 200 design, requires a little more management. Also, 6 people together, maybe a few too many. And if you need to go to 200, set up 2 100 lines. Now, someone who's a stickler for productivity may say, well, you need more sewing machines. Well, we're not talking about $1 million machines here. So going to your next door neighbor and knocking on their door and asking for a sewing machine is not going to hurt anybody. So yeah, for sewing machines, no big sin there.